Reactive Training Systems.
Welcome back to the RTS Podcast. We've got a special podcast for you today. I'm going to be interviewing Dave Tate. If you've been around powerlifting at all, I'm sure you know who Dave is. He's the founder, owner of Elite FTS, one of the front-running equipment retailers in the powerlifting space, and also in some other spaces, as you'll hear us talk about during the podcast. But Dave has been around powerlifting for a long time. He's kind of most notable for training at Westside. He was a high-level multiply powerlifter in the 90s and early 2000s, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when his last meet was, but a high-level guy. And the way I came in contact with Dave is through the Elite FTS site. He was one of the first people who was putting out a lot of content about powerlifting training on the internet. So imagine, young Mike just getting into powerlifting. It's kind of the early days of the internet in the late 90s, and I'm reading Powerlifting USA, the actual print magazine, and coming across Louis Simmons articles, coming across Westside articles, and I've talked about my adventures and misadventures of implementing that system, right? And then I'm trying to learn more and figure out more. It's really the Elite FTS site that filled in a lot of gaps for me. And we kind of jump right into things when we start the interview here. But so just a bit of background. When I was a sophomore in high school, so it would have been about 15 years old or so. I was training. I was doing what I thought was Westside training. I had just done a training cycle and got weaker. And I wrote into the Elite FTS Q&A, kind of telling Dave, hey man, I just did this training cycle and got weaker. What happened? And Dave said, hey, look, I'm going to be in the office on Saturday morning at this time. Give me a call. And so I did, and Dave talked to me on the phone for like an hour probably. There was no charge for it or anything like that. He gave me advice, told me some of the things that I had been doing wrong, and I went back and corrected those things in subsequent cycles and got a lot stronger. And that always stood out to me as like it's just a really cool thing to do, right? That here I am, this 15-year-old kid who's nobody, there's no such thing as a following on the internet, even really. So I certainly didn't have that. I hadn't done a real competition. He didn't know me from anybody. He doesn't know if I have potential as a powerlifter or not. No contact whatsoever. But he just picks up the phone and helps. And you'll see that that's kind of a recurring theme that we talk about quite a bit is just help, and that's part of what Dave's passion is, and part of what Dave's mission, I suppose, is something like that. What his purpose is, I suppose. So anyway, I've kind of rambled on about this long enough, but I wanted you to know kind of where I'm coming from, just through the powerlifting worlds as we've both kind of gone on for the last 16 years. So I do think that we had a little bit of recording trouble just at the very, very end. So I'll probably pop back on at the end and leave with some closing comments. But that's kind of all the preamble I wanted to give you. So here's my conversation with Dave Tate.
This is Dave.
Hey Dave, this is Mike Tuchscherer.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for making the time to chat.
No problem.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
I was gonna say, surely you don't remember that?
I remember talking to you.
Do you really?
Yeah, because it's. I hate to say this without sounding really bad. The lifters who end up going on doing well, I remember.
That's very cool, man. I had no idea that you actually
Well, it's kind
remember
of fucked up in a way because it's my bias. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
That's my favorite demographic, even though it's the smallest demographic we have.
Hey, we've all got them, right? But
yeah.
I mean, it definitely made a big impact on me, and just reading the Q&A over the years and just, I don't know, I mean, it's like I've learned a lesson from this. Like, you hear people talk about marketing and stuff like that, and it always comes off a little bit weird, but they talk about building relationships with audiences and stuff like that, and it always sounds really vague, but I think that's what they're talking about, really. They're talking about helping people,
Yeah. This is good stuff. Are we live now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I was like, dude, this is stuff we should capture.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the big things, kind of like what you're talking about, that hit me many years ago was we sponsored a lifter named Scott Yard, who, when we first brought Scott in, I think he did something insane, like 2,600 pounds and multiply as a 20-year-old kid, just stupid insane. And then he went on to, the thing with him was he was drug-free, but he didn't want anybody to know because he didn't want to have to deal with all the criticism and all the bullshit that kind of goes along with that. Well, after a couple years of multiply, he decided to go USAPL.
Yeah.
So you may remember Scott. So
I do.
I think 275.
Yeah.
And now he didn't dominate there the way he did, in the multiply, but he was still strong as fuck.
Right.
But the coolest thing that he ever told me was, is a collective group years ago on the Q&A, we would get, questions, and there was always, I don't think there's such a thing as a stupid question, but back then I probably did, so he suggested at one point in time, he says, go search my name and look at the questions that I was asking. And he was one of these guys that was like, how far apart in inches should my feet be when I squat?
Yeah.
And I mean, just really, really beginner questions. And Bob Youngs was answering every single one of them. And then it turns out, 3-4 years later, the guy's got, all-time world record. And, so it's like, man, you never know who's listening on the other end. For one thing, you never know what they're going to end up doing. And there's no such thing as a stupid question, because if he needed to know that at the time, then that's what he needed to know. So kind of getting to your point, the online marketing, I think it's got its place, but one of the best examples that I can use is let's just take Instagram for a moment. The biggest thing that I try to personally do on Instagram isn't the stupid joke posts that I make, or, that's just actually entertainment to me more than it is anything else. I want people to DM me. Yeah. Because if they DM me, I'm one step closer to building a better relationship with them. Yeah. So then the question and answers are going to be better. And, you're building a relationship where, and everything's still personalized service. Even though I'm in retail, it's still a personalized connection, because people have choice, between you or somebody else, or if it's online training or, whatever it's going to be. I'm amazed at the number of people who don't reply to DMs because they're like, oh, I'm an online trainer, I get paid for this, fuck him, I'm not going to answer this question. But this could be your client 2 years from now. Yeah. Not only that, but your client that refers 5 other ones. Yeah. You don't know, but they spend so much time trying to get the right angle of the right picture. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Which is like, dude, you're spending like 2 hours to try to get this perfect picture to be able to get 500 likes, but you're ignoring 5 DMs. Yeah. It's crazy to me.
We talk about that, like, just kind of among our little team of coaches, that, I mean, a coaching business is, like, it grows through recruitment and retention. Like, those are your two things, right? And it's so much
Mm-hmm.
easier to retain a client than it is to recruit a new client. And you do that, I think, primarily through cultivating a relationship with them, you know. And that's the thing that we've definitely
Yes.
messed up, you know, in the earlier days. And I hope we're getting it more right than not now.
I think it's the biggest thing from what I see in that space where people mess up the most, because I get nothing if I refer people. All I tell the people is, if I refer you to somebody, don't tell them I sent you. And then if it doesn't work out, let me know, then I'm never going to refer anybody again.
Right.
The biggest complaint that I get is lack of follow-up.
Yeah.
You would think the biggest complaint are cookie cutter programs and stuff like that, but it's not. The biggest one is they just don't follow up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy crap, you know. And then when I talk to trainers, you know, who are working the business, you're doing it, I think, more from a professional end. Like, this is how you're making your living, and
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Other people, I think, I call it as they're you know, you've been around for a long time. So years ago, you know, powerlifters would bounce in bars to be able to pay for meat fees and supplements and crap like that. You know, online training is the new bouncer. You know, so that's what it is, and it's bad for you because they drop the perception of price tremendously, and they don't get back, you know, to anybody on the other stuff. But it kind of opens the door for, you know, the people who are following up. But a lot of the guys that I talk to that are in the space in a non-personal or a non-professional way, their client retention's horrible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I asked them the lifetime value of their client. They have no idea, which means they're signing up once and then never coming back again.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's listening that's considering a coach, you can only do so much as a coach to help somebody 12 weeks before me. I mean, yes, there is a small, you know, say 8 weeks where you can build some strength, but you need them in the off season too.
Yeah.
You know, you need to build the base that you're going to springboard, however you're going to periodize them off into the other thing. And I think client education needs to be more prominent, so they don't think, oh, I just need to hire somebody 10 or 12 weeks out for a meet, because I think that's what a lot of people do. Then they do the meet, then they leave, and you're like, oh, man. You know, it takes the meet before you really realize what their weak points are.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was just today watching kind of a pseudo interview that that Matt Winning did, and he was talking about needing to work with somebody, you know, for a year and a half to really figure out what they need, you know, what works best for them. And I mean, you can agree with the timeline or not, but I mean, it takes longer than you'd expect. And I know that when people hear that, they kind of cringe a little bit, you know, like, man, that's a big investment to, you know, I won't really get up to speed for, you know, potentially a long time, you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard from a business perspective to lay that out.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have one girl I'm helping here who came in, 6 or 9 months ago, and she wants to break the all-time world squat record, which is, you know, she's raw. She wanted to get into gear, so she wants to go after Becca Swanson's 850 or whatever it was, and she had a 550 raw, so it's definitely doable. But the conversation I had with her was, you need to understand that this is going to take 5 or 6 meets to be able to get there. So we're looking at 2, possibly 3 years. If this is what you really want, you know, don't tell me it's, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't tell me you want to do this in a year. We got to be realistic here. And now I don't charge anybody, so it changes the dynamics a lot. So I'm not asking for this 3-year commitment, but at the same time, I don't have to help her. You know, I can throw her out at any given time. And once I got that agreement made, then to be able to spend the first 3 or 4 months only working on technique is nothing compared to the broad scope of the program. So, optimally, if you could get every client for a quadrennial and know whether you want that peak to be, say it's the worlds or whatever it is, you could get them there. But shit, are they going to commit to it? You know, there's the reality of it then. You know, kind of like with Matt, it's a great concept, but the reality becomes a little cluttered.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to tease that stuff out in advance a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to radically change something, which maybe in 12 weeks they're going to be weaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody's different. And
you mentioned something a second ago that I'd like to get your take on. So you were talking about how some coaches who are more casual kind of drop the price point for coaches who are more professional. That, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to mirror maybe the kind of space that you're in as far as training equipment. That there are some companies out there that sell cheaper equipment at a lower price point, but that's not your game. So how do you deal with that? Is there a strategy that maybe other coaches could learn from?
You have to know your product. You need to know what you really sell. You know, so what we really sell is, you know, results from training. You know, I mean, if you want to break it way down, that's what we sell. So we do that through the products that we offer and, you know, at the highest quality and so forth. So, you know, for the results to be there, you know, and to me, when I consider results, I want results through the whole board. So when I'm looking at something, while it is the smallest demographic we have, I'm looking at a world caliber powerlifter like yourself. Like, will this rack work for you? Will it work for a 900-pound squatter, 800-pound squatter, 1,000-pound squatter? If not, I don't want to sell it, because I know if it's going to work for you, it's going to work for anybody that squats under that.
Yeah.
You know, where the other way to look at it would be, well, if it just holds 400, that's going to take care of 90% of the people. Well, that's way cheaper to be able to make, but see, that's not the business I'm in.
Yeah.
You know, so once you know what the real business you're in, then it becomes a little bit easier to brand and to market and so forth. And you don't get as frustrated because our market share is not going to be the same as some of the people that are dominating the equipment market. I'm okay with that because that's not what we're selling.
Right.
You know, it's our customers would probably, the way I explain it is they would place training as one of their top 4 priorities in life. Now, when you look at what's there, you know, religion, family, work, training, I mean, there's, you know, school, you know, something's got to give, you know, for training to make the top 4. I'm not saying first, but we run into that, you know, and it was for me for many, many years. Yeah. The higher it goes, actually, the less probable they become of being a customer because they're too broke, because everything you know is going into that. But that's what it is. So even from the education standpoint, we're not putting out articles that are, you know, the best 5 exercises for your biceps, because that doesn't, like, our readers have already seen that crap for 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, they've graduated past that. They're coming to the site not really so much to read the full article. They're coming to skim the article to see, okay, I forgot this, or hey, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
You know, so they're more skim readers because they already know a lot of what we're putting up, and should, because training's been this high priority. Whereas when it falls down lower, I don't want to say I don't care about those people, because I do, but they're being taken care of by the customers we sell to. Yeah. The coaches, the trainers, and all that. They're taking care of those people that training is going to fall as a lower priority. So indirectly, you know, we kind of get wrap straps, you know, shirts and stuff like that through that market, but we don't directly advertise to that market, which is a huge market. It's a way bigger market. Yeah. But I got into this for longevity. I don't really want to ever have to work for anybody other than myself. But I mean, you find out quickly you do work for your staff, you work for your customers. You're always working for somebody. But
it's a different dynamic, I guess, though, for sure.
Yeah, my short answer is know what business you're really in, and then stick to that niche. But I think it's a little bit worse because you can look at our equipment and you can look at junk equipment, and most people can tell the difference. I mean, online it's a little bit harder, but most people are like, oh my God, look at this. I mean, you can tell the real crap from the stuff that's higher quality. Agree. Yeah. You can kind of feel and tell from a picture. you can't tell when it's online training. That's where it gets really, where the education aspect has to come into the customer, because when that price gets devalued to a point where somebody's charging $200 for 6 months, you can't service a client for $200 for six. I used to charge for personal training before I started the company $100 an hour. So I had people paying me, $400 a week. So compound that out,
Right.
over 3 months, it's way more than $200.
Yeah.
Now, you see what I'm saying? Now,
Yeah,
granted, I'm not
absolutely.
working with I wouldn't work with an online client for 4 hours a week, but if you really put time into it, I'm sure at the front end, developing the program and really looking at these stuff, you're putting at least 1 or 2 hours in per client,
Mm-hmm.
and then it might drop off. When somebody has, the ability to really make that difference, and they can't charge what the product's actually really worth, or if they do, they look so much like an outlier that they don't get the business,
Yeah.
then ultimately what happens to that service over a period of time is they drop it, so it becomes less serving than what it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, when they were able to get paid more for what their time's really worth.
Yeah. I
And
understand.
that's where the delusion of that service, because of all the other ones. But I do think it's getting, you're in the space, so you know better than I do. I do think it's getting better, because I do think the lifters can now tell that, hey, look, just because the guy's strong as fuck doesn't mean they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or they go through them and they realize the results suck, and then they end up finding, people who really know what they're doing.
I think the education has helped with that a lot, but really, what you're saying, what I hear you saying is that the business that a coach is in is not selling a program. Like, that's something else, that,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to understand what it is that you're bringing to the table that goes beyond that.
And how that differs from your competitors,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's what you sell then, because there's a lot of ways to get people strong.
Yeah. That touches on another thing that I wanted to bring up. So I know that you've got a heuristic that you talk about quite a bit as far as finding a good coach, and I totally messed that up. So this is maybe a pattern with me, and following advice. Maybe your advice specifically is I mess it up first. So,
Mm-hmm.
so your heuristic for finding a good coach, which generally I think is great. First, what have they done themselves? Who have they coached, and who have they learned from? So,
Yes, there's a couple other facets there where what is their formal education?
mm-hmm.
So there's formal education. What have they personally done? Who have they coached? Who have they kind of like mentored or trained with?
Yeah.
And then the fifth aspect, it's kind of slipping my mind right now, but what it basically does is, I think it's in one of my blogs somewhere. So say on a scale of 1 to 5, nobody's going to hit all 5s, right? Because you're not going to have a PhD and, multiple world record holder. It just isn't going to happen. It's to get people to look at all facets, to realize that the person with the PhD but can't lift their weight out of a paper bag might be a good person to talk to consulting wise, but they're going to suck as a coach.
Yeah.
The person who's got multiple world records but has no clue how the body even works is probably going to suck as a coach. And some of the other ones, like who have they trained under, like who coached them?
Yeah.
Not everybody has access or the financial ability to be able to get the education in the field. So they're learning in the gym, through the people that they've trained with, or trained under. Because you train with a training partner that really knows their shit, you pick up a lot. It's especially 10 years ago when people trained more in groups
Yeah.
than what they do now. And I think it's important to look at who they've coached, because that shows the track record of success, from that standpoint. I mean, ultimately, the best coach is going to be somebody who, through a period of time, has trained with or around or been networking with somebody better than them so that they can learn from them, somebody that's kind of at the same level so they can compete with them, and then somebody lower so they can teach them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it boils down to try to help, people make more informed decisions, because when somebody's really strong in one but not even a 1 or 2 in the others, that's a red flag.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting problem, because, if you're in the market for a coach, you're almost certainly a non-expert in that area, and you're looking to evaluate experts or supposed experts in the area, so I think it's a really cool heuristic to kind of get around the difficulty of that, or to address some of that difficulty.
It's a starting point, and I think that's the people that have criticized it that don't understand that it's just the starting point. After good. That, people still have to do their due diligence. They need to ask for referrals. I mean, just like you would with somebody that's going to cut a tree down in your backyard, or mow your lawn or whatever it is. You got to put just as much due diligence into that than you would anything else. But it gets a lot of crap out of the way, by looking at that through that.
And then I would think that once you're working with a coach, what you're evaluating then is something like enjoyment of the process and the results that you're getting. Because if you enjoy working with a coach and you're getting results, does it matter that they, don't keep up with the latest research? Probably not.
No.
If you're not getting results and they do, then that doesn't help you either, So I think the results and the enjoyment is kind of how it boils down once you're there,
I think enjoyment could actually probably be placed before results. And the reason for that is you've been doing this for a very long time. So, I mean, you have the knowledge to be able to take somebody who's very close to, say second in the world. You can help them get first in the world as long as they have the genetic, capacity to be able to do that. You can definitely help them do that. That's a rare skill set, right? But it's a skill set that's only applied to maybe 0.0001% of the population.
Right.
That what you really know and what you really love about the whole process, you're not going to use for the majority of the clients that you work with.
Yeah.
It's the reality of it. While it would be great, when you really think about it, would it really? I mean, do you really want to work with all those people? You'd be beating yourself in the head every day.
Yeah, you can.
We can. They're the most hard-headed people to work with. But if they enjoy the process to where they're comfortable, because training needs to be a very kind of flexible process, and you use a rate of perceived exertion, so it's more flexible built into the program. But if somebody's sticking to a percent-based program, that changes daily, hourly, weekly. There has to be solid communication so the coach knows, look, this person feels like shit, they're sick. And if there's not open dialogue, which starts with enjoyment, they're not going to know that. You could run a person into the ground and never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that is what helps to move the results. Beginners are going to make progress doing anything. We all know that. The intermediates become a little bit trickier.
Yeah.
But that's where, and communication needs to be there as well, because you could take them through a whole training cycle and they don't make the gains that they think they should make. Where meanwhile and I know sometimes that's just how shit works.
Right. Yeah.
The next cycle you'll put 30 pounds on your bench. You don't know where the hell it came from, but a large part of it was the cycles that you did before leading up to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the whole non-linear progress thing. Yeah.
I mean, it would be great if it was linear, but shit, we'd both be benching 1,200 pounds by now.
Wouldn't that be cool? Let me tell you real quick how I messed up your heuristic. So this was back last fall. So I've not been competing so much myself, and I finally kind of taken some time again away from always prepping for a competition. I realized, hey, there's a lot of physical things that I would have liked to have done that I always kind of ducked out of because I'm always getting ready for a meet and can't get hurt, you know. And one of those was doing some sort of martial art or boxing or something like that, right? So I thought now is a great time, I'm going to do it. And so I found myself in this situation where I'm calling up coaches and talking to them, and I'm like, hey, I'm in this position now. Like, I don't know anything about boxing or MMA. And I'm trying to evaluate which coach I need to go with, you know? So this is a great time for me to use this heuristic, you know? So I'm talking to this guy who's a, you know, potential coach, and asking him about his career, real, you know, he was a pro level fighter, not quite UFC type, but, you know, he was up there. Who have you learned from? He's traveled the world and learned from a lot of people that, you know, even as a non-expert, I know who those people are, you know. So that was cool. And I get to the part where, you know, I'm asking him, who has he coached? And I kind of screwed up the delivery of that question, and it turned into something more like, how many champions have you coached? And he was a little bit semi-offended, right? And in hindsight, like, I get it. It's like, here's dude on day 0, you know, I want to know how many champions. Like, just come in and see, maybe do a practice or two before you start worrying about champions, you know, which I thought...
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I thought, you know, if I'm ever in this situation again, how I'm going to frame that is, how many people have you coached like me, and what have those results been like, you know? Yeah,
that's actually, because I think the way that I have it worded is how many people they created that are elite themselves.
Yeah.
And that is a whack dynamic now that you present it this way.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends on your level, you know, if you're trying to get to that point. I mean, I wasn't.
Yeah,
I was...
but you're not. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so you
absolutely,
wouldn't want... And you wouldn't want that expectation of the coach when you're coming in just trying to try something out for fun,
right,
for them to think, okay, look, you know, I take everybody to the UFC.
Yeah.
You're like, dude, I just want to work out, man. I don't want to spend 8 hours a day in the gym.
Right.
Yes, I may have to make an amendment to that one there a little bit.
Well, there's another, just, I suppose, thing that's been eaten at me that I've heard you say before, and I just kind of wanted to get some clarification on. This would go back to when you were still training at Westside. I've heard you say that when new people were thinking of joining the gym, that I believe it was Louis who would ask them, I know what Westside can do for you, but what can you do for Westside? And I've always wondered, like, how do people answer that question? Like, what are some good answers or bad answers that come out of that? Seems like a tough question. I don't
think that was really something that, you know, I block these things all the time. You know how cell phones, we get the spam calls and nobody talks?
Yeah.
I got 20 a day. I don't think anybody directly was ever asked that question. I think it was an indirect thought, you know, that he would have, and that we kind of all would have, you know, looking at the person. And over the I don't want to say there was a trial period, but, you know, some people didn't last, you know, as long as other people, but that was kind of always in the back of the mind. And it was more along the lines of, yeah, Louis was looking for world records, and he was looking for numbers on the board and stuff like that. You know, I think collectively what we were looking at is this somebody that can help us all get better, you know, and somebody that we can help get better. And is the ego contained? Because it's a sport of egos, you know that. I mean, it's a sport of huge egos, and that's okay, and it has to be kind of part of the sport. But when you're with other people training for the same goals, the ego kind of needs to be set aside, unless you're talking shit and, you know, that kind of, there's a fit, you know what I'm saying? There's a fit
Right.
on how that ego needs to fit. It can still flourish and be, you know, what it needs to be, but if it's way out of hand, you know, they're prima donnas, they're better, and, you know, nobody was. So I think that's really what it was, is because you can't expect everybody that's coming in to be an all-time world record holder, even though that's what Louis was looking for at the time.
Got
You know,
it. Yeah.
I remember when he brought in, I believe it was Wendler and JL, and, you know, there was always people that would kind of trickle in the club. And then when he brought them in, I remember asking him, you know, are you sure you want to do this? And it wasn't because of their personalities or anything like that. It's now you're bringing in people who have already gotten their elite total. They're educated in the strength and conditioning field. They've already kind of semi-developed a training philosophy that they feel works. All right, it's kind of like I was, and this is why I was asking it, because it took a year for me to buy in. And do you really want to bring these guys in, like in a screwed up way? You know, are they too smart to bring in? You know, because you want early buy-in.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember him saying, "I am tired, or not tired, but Louis, so take it with, you know, the way Louis is. Basically, he's sick of making elite lifters. You know, he can do that. And that's probably true for him. It's a dime a dozen. He can get anybody to an elite total. He wanted the all-time best. So that's when it's like, okay, fuck all that. I'm looking for the people who are the highest caliber to be able to recruit and bring in, to be able to see what the human body can really do. And it made sense, you know, after all the years of, you know, taking kids from the neighborhood, you know, getting them to, you know, elite total. I got it. You know, I knew where he was going, but I also knew it was going to change the dynamic of the club. How it would, I didn't know, but it's his club, and it worked. It's just, you know, I don't think that really anybody expected the pivot that happened around 2010, 2012. You know, basically the growth of Raw. It hasn't just impacted, you know, multiply. It's had a dramatic effect on single ply as well. So just here across the board.
Right.
And, you know, both of those have just basically dropped out of the bucket. And that's okay. You know, the sport changes and grows, but that changed a lot of things as far as, because I think Louis still is, you know, multiply. And it's because they lift bigger numbers, and he's all about bigger numbers.
Got it. Yeah.
You know, and he's also, you know, I love the guy to death. I don't communicate with him as much as I used to many years ago, but, you know, he did a podcast with Joe Rogan, which I had to watch 3 or 4 times, because the first one I was like, oh my God, you know, this is the guy that was like my father. This is why I'm so fucked up. You know, and I had to watch it a few times just for my own sanity to realize, oh, okay, I see what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, Joe mentioned that he lives in a bubble, and he kind of does.
Yeah.
You know, like I would really be surprised if Louis didn't know that there were less than 1,000 lifters net lifting gear total, single and multiply.
Wow.
You know,
really, that's kind of what the number's down to?
I used to get numbers from Powerlifting Watch, and so the crazy thing with powerlifting is statistics and numbers are so hard to get, because before Powerlifting Watch, you kind of had to go off federation numbers, which nobody wanted to give you, Powerlifting USA subscriptions, and then kind of guess and say, okay, 15,000.
Right.
And then Powerlifting Watch would be able to provide numbers and could give me unique number of competitors per year.
Yeah.
And it's 15, 17 grand. And that was, you know, so, but it's a weird time, because there was a crossover between Powerlifting USA and Powerlifting Watch. When Powerlifting Watch became really the only place people sent results to, not everybody still sent results. So nothing was ever skewed, but the number never really grew as a whole that much, like 15,000, 17,000, and so forth. But before open powerlifting became a thing, that really was the only resource that you had, so you could kind of guess.
Right.
And the last year that was the only resource, there was only like 535 total multiply lifters out of 15,000 and maybe 1,200 single ply. Now, now when I look at open powerlifting, that's a bigger number. You know, overall it's a bigger number. I think it's like 46,000 total competitors for 2018, where I don't know how they do, you know, their demographics or their data and so forth from that, but it's still obviously raw is 90% of the sport. If it changes or doesn't change really is irrelevant, because let's say it changed back, it took 3 years for it to kind of fade out, you know what I'm saying, for raw to really get to that big point. It didn't just happen overnight. It took 3 to 5 years. If you get a lifter today, on average, they're not going to be around 3 or 5 years from now.
That's kind of one of the sadder parts of the growth, I think. It's like, I guess I've been around long enough to qualify as an old timer, at least at some of these competitions. And at the USAPL Raw Nationals a couple weeks ago, you know, a few of us were kind of lamenting some of that, you know, and I suppose it started off like, you know, man, can you believe that these people don't know who so-and-so is and don't know who this guy, like, that's ridiculous, you know? And at first it kind of made me mad, but then I thought, you know, I think I have some blame in that, you know, that I do have, you know, something like an audience, you know, what am I doing to fix that? You know, so we're going to try to do some things, and because I don't think people who are new to the sport, you know, 3 to 5 years, like, I don't think they want to be, you know, ignorant to the history of it. But it's not unlike coaching or anything else. We've got to meet them where they are, you know? Yes,
it does. And I totally agree with that. It's since, you know, the sport didn't really transfer over to the digital age very well, at least the history of it. Because Powerlifting USA, which was the history, you know, pretty much the whole history, died, you know, right around that same time. You know, had they still stayed active and had archives and, you know, all their articles were still online, that would have salvaged a whole lot of the history, but it's not there, and which would be great if it was there. So it's kind of up to all of us to be able to share, because people really don't know. I mean, they don't know the history of the USAPL and how it was, you know, everybody wants one federation, and those of us that have been around a while are like, oh shit, you know, that was happening at one time. Now, granted, when it was 2 or 3, I think that was a good number. You know, 300, no, that's probably not a good thing.
Right.
But, you know, there has to be competition. There has to be some division between, you know, drug-free, not drug-free. You know, that I think everybody agrees, you know, kind of on that. But, you know, I think if they knew more of the history, they would be able to have better conversations about what they want moving forward. Because what I see that I think is really cool is this whole Raw thing was not in the best interest of any of the federations at the time, and it wasn't in the best interest of any of the bigger companies that were supporting the sport, Enzor, Titan, Metal, and so forth. So that whole movement went against the best corporate interest and the best, you know, federation interest, which means the people who really have control of the sport are the lifters. And I don't think they understand how much control they really have. But all they have to do is to know the history to realize, holy shit, they changed everything. You know, but in hindsight to that, the one thing that we don't have enough time yet to be able to know is, did gear extend people's careers? You know, like, forget the multiply, because, you know, I'll agree there was like 6 years where that shit was just out of hand. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, up until that point when it was just regular double ply and all the other kind of stuff, the carryover was a little bit bigger in single ply. But either way, you know, it seemed like lifters stayed around, you know, 5, 10 years. Is it supporting of the joints and all the other kind of stuff, or is it just the generation today isn't going to stay interested as long? We don't know because not enough time has passed.
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing, just the longevity in the sport. Like, there's a whole training aspect to that as well. And like, I think I got caught up in it a little bit too for a while, that, this notion that I've got to train harder than everybody I'm competing against, which sounds like it maybe ought to be true, but I don't, like, you can screw that up,
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what caught up with me, and why I've had to take a hopefully temporary break. But who knows? Who knows how that plays out?
Well,
I think part of it's the training attitude.
Yes, it is. That's what I was going to say. There's a mental thing. You even had a built-in barometer, your RPE, to be able to control that, but yet you still fucked it up with yourself.
Right.
And that's just the nature of a competitor that wants to compete at the highest level. It's a very hard thing to control, and I think Louis did a really good job of it, because it's when you're working with lifters at that level, it's not pushing them, it's holding them back. And that's the challenge. But the bigger challenge is when you are working with somebody and it's remotely or, infrequently, you don't know when that switch happens. Because you start out by, you got to kick them in the ass to get them to work hard, because they don't understand what they really need to do.
Yeah.
The effort they have to apply, into a barbell. For you to do a max triple, peaking for a meet, that can mess you up for a few days.
Yeah.
Where an intermediate lifter can do it and go for a 5-mile run the next day like it's no big deal. Like, what? Yeah. You're not putting enough effort in there. So some of it, I think, is unavoidable if they're going to get to the top. It's kind of the price that you pay, or the beast that's needed to be there. And it's walking. I kind of relate it to walking the edge of a cliff. When it's that important to you, you're always going to walk that edge, and you're going to slip every now and again.
Yeah.
When you're more conservative, you walk a little bit further away from the edge. But I think what happens is when you move into a more coaching role, then you know how to keep people away from the edge. But I think we also become a little bit timid, where sometimes we need to shoulder them off of the edge. Yeah. Because in a meet, there's times that you have to be that other level, but you're still trying to keep doing this. So the problem becomes, the older you get, the wiser you become, and you start to forget that, yes, you need to back it down, but you also need to bring it out, but now you're confused. You know what I'm saying? It's like, when can I do this and get away with it? Because I don't want to screw everything up, because that means I'm going to have to start out, Now it's an injury that's going to put you out for 5 weeks. It's like every rep becomes, is this worth it or not?
Right.
Where before it's like, fuck, let's do this.
Yeah.
So it's just different.
So you've got to hold them back enough that they can benefit from the wisdom that you've gained, but not so much that you take away the thing that put them there to begin with,
Yes. Yeah. And when it's yourself, it becomes a whole different dynamic. Where it's a large part of what you love are those sets that you really shouldn't do. You know what I'm saying? So it's asking yourself, why am I really still doing this?
Is that still true for you now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and then I can't hold a bar, so I come up with creative ways, like, fuck it,
Yeah.
I'm going to use a spider bar, I'm going to load it up, I'll reverse band, whatever I got to do, so I can strain, do basically max effort work in the safest possible manner, so I don't break anything, but still could, but I'm less likely to, but I still love that. I don't think it's ever going to go away. It's like straining, I don't know. For me, it's never gone away. I tried all this bodybuilding shit and all this other kind of stuff trying to get lean. Nothing compares to that.
Yeah.
Just straining.
So
it's just,
you're really still a powerlifter at heart.
it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I don't think it goes away for any of us. And if it does, then what?
Yeah. I wouldn't want it to, right? But
no.
So
it's just it's how to manage it,
Well, this was another thing that was interesting to me, so you've been, like, you haven't competed in a long time, so I didn't know kind of where that was at now. Like, if you could go back now and have the body that you had in your 20s, like, it sounds like you're still there mentally, where you could be, the powerlifter who doesn't give a fuck and just kind of go crazy in there, right?
Yeah, it was my blessing and my curse, and that was in 2004. I was told my right shoulder needs completely replaced. It's had surgery on it twice beforehand, and it's frozen. So I have very limited range of motion. So I cannot grab a squat bar. I can't touch a bench to my chest, but I can hit a one board shoulder saver. And I can do safety squat bars. I just can't get my hand on a squat bar. And the only way that I would be able to do that would be able to get the shoulder replaced. And the more I looked at the success rate of that, the worse it became of an option to do, because then it became, well, you might not even be able to do push-ups, or, you'll just have to do regular training. And I'm like, but if it's fucked up, I can still strain and do board presses and safety squat bar. But if it's replaced, I might not even be able to do those. So it's the blessing looking back, because it took me out of the sport, because you can't go to a meet and use a safe squat bar, so, and I needed to be out. It was 23 years, and you're trying, the messed up thing with the sport is your all-time best total is a total you never did, because you had more. Like you either did, like, if you put all your best lifts together in one meet, that usually exceeds your best total by 100 and some pounds.
Yeah.
So in your mind, you're like, damn, if I just put it all together. But then you start thinking of, well, when I did that squat, I probably had 30 more pounds. So you start hypothetically putting all this shit together, which adds like 250 pounds to your total. And that you stay for that, because you're like, this can actually happen. Then the reality kicks in for like a second. It's like, well, I've never gone 9 for 9, but 2 out of 100 meets, so it's not going to happen. But, and at a certain point, it just keeps grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. And I already had issues with arthritis at the time in all joints. So that kind of put the stop to it, but it was a very fast stop, and one that really wasn't my choice.
Yeah.
So it kind of came with a little bit of an identity crisis, because it's all I knew from 12, from 83 to 2005. It's like, well, what do I do now? What do I train? How do I train? So I'm going to train for fitness? You fucking kidding me? It's like, what am I going to do? And that's where the little bodybuilding and dieting shit kind of all fit in, because mentally it was hard, and it created an objective to train for, just like a meet. And so you get caught up in that cycle. Then, I got lean. I'm like, this is stupid. I don't even like the training. This is terrible. I can't eat a hamburger. Fuck this. And I think for me, being, working my way up from 198 to 308, I only cared about strength. I never really cared about what I looked like. So the abs and shit like that meant nothing. I mean, it never meant anything. So to get lean and seeing myself, it's like disgusting. It's like, but I mean, you don't want to be a fat, gross pig either. And so it's been this vicious cycle that even going through those phases, it's like, well, I wonder how much I could do if I just focused on doing a max on a yoke bar on a box that isn't going to destroy my replaced hips.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then it's, to me, it's a cool programming thing, here comes my justification of all this, because you start out, you're nowhere near being in shape to even train for it. It's like, okay, now I need to train to be able to train for it. That's going to take 3 months. Then when I get to this point, I need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to get there. Then once I get there, how long can I push it before things are going to start to break down? So just like getting ready for a meet. And then it's like, okay, after it happens, I need to get the hell away from it so I don't need something else replaced, which, is 2 more months of, no bars on your back or no bars on your hands, just training.
Yeah.
And then what's the next thing? And so it's still there, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. It's just not really on display, and nor do I really want it to be.
It's the whole process of, tinkering with it, like, hey, this is the thing I want to do. Here's my plan on how I'm going to get there. And so you start and you execute the plan and adapt it along the way. Like that whole tinkering thing, at least for me, like I've discovered that that's the thing that I care about the most.
It is. It really is. But you can't forget that all that tinkering leads to like 7 seconds of when that bar is loaded and you hit that ammonia cap and then you stand up with that fucker that you never done before. That's 7 seconds that you just can't fuck up. That's kind of how I explain it to the lifters out here. It's just don't screw up for 6 seconds. You'll be cool. That's the payoff. I think it takes more. It takes far more to get that 6 seconds of success, more or less, than people give it credit for.
Well, man, so just talking to you about it now, like, I mean, so where are you at after you do that? You go, okay.
I've become smart enough now that what I tell my lifters to do after a meet is, and it depends upon their skill level. So if they're high skilled, it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks. I don't want a bar on their back or in their hands for 6 to 8 weeks. They can do any machine crap they want, any single leg crap, any dumbbells, any of that stuff, but no bar in their hand. I don't want any compression on their spine.
Yeah.
Either a barbell or a hand, and it's a rule. Now, if they're a beginner, I make it 4 weeks because the loads are lighter and, they haven't developed that neural efficiency or even the muscular coordination that the heavy weight's going to beat them down training. It's the training. It's the last 5 weeks that kills people. It just destroys you. If you make it through the last 5 weeks, any power lifter at the top level, the key is to make it through the last 5 or 6 weeks as healthy as you possibly can, because the healthiest guy wins. It is, bottom line. You get through there without a hamstring pull or a tweaked knee or, anything like that. That's kind of the case. Yeah. But you got to let all that stuff heal. So what it kind of forces me to do is, if I do something like to squat or any of those things, because I force them to do it, I have to do it myself, or I look the fool, because I'm already telling them enough. Don't do what I do, just do what I say, because I'm an idiot and I have nothing to lose. My worst case scenario is just another surgery. I don't care. Your worst case scenario is you can't make it to the meet. That's a big deal. That's kind of fucked up now that I said that. But but I guess it's my weird realization. But I gotta set an example. You know what I'm saying? I gotta set a standard. But when you do that, you get weak. Not super weak, but say you drop 10, 15%, and you're going to drop 5 or 10 after a meet anyhow. But when you drop that extra 5 or 10%, now you have to build that into the front end of whatever that next training cycle is going to be, because you can't just jump in to train for it. So that's where I say you got to train for a meet. And that's because I put them in a position, or I put me in a position that has to be necessary. Where when I was at Westside, the motto there is you're always ready for a meet. You're always 4 weeks out, where there's no way I can do that. And I don't want my lifters to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a useful takeaway. That's something that I've learned, I guess, as I've, spent more time in the sport, that I know for a lot of people who compete in the IPF and compete in USA Powerlifting specifically at a high level, they kind of find themselves in the circuit of going to the Arnold, going to the World Championships, and going to Nationals. And so you're always, there's always something that's coming up. And I didn't realize how much of a grind that was until I stopped doing it. And now it's like, oh, hey, if you actually did take a year off of competing or something, then that would give you plenty of time to really back things down and heal up everything that you need to heal up and build some muscle and, do all these things that you ought to be doing, but you're always getting ready for a meet instead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a triple grind. That's tough. I mean, 3 meets in a year is tough because you don't have any time. And kind of going back to what I said, imagine how good you could compete if you were peaked, but nothing hurt.
Yeah.
Oh man, and I mean, that's the biggest challenge of peaking, right?
Right.
Now, when you got 3 meets a year, that over and over and over, that almost becomes impossible.
Yeah. There's never much time for off seasons and things like that. That's true.
Yeah. So you skip a meet. Well, I mean, you still got to qualify. That's the tough thing there. You skip a meet, skip a year, get back in the fray. You could be a whole completely different lifter.
Yeah. I'm not sure how you are on time, Dave.
I'm good. Good. The trick to what we just said, though, the tough part is once you step away from the grind of those 3 meets a year and you start focusing on other stuff, and then you jump back in that grind again, it might not be worth it anymore. That's the risk you take.
It changes your perspective, yeah.
Yes, because you've been in that same perspective for a decade or more, over and over and over, and all of a sudden you kind of get off the train, and you're like, oh, this is cool. My business is doing better because you can focus more on everything. And then you go to step on the train again, it's like, fuck,
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you can still enjoy the training process and, different ways of training and all that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just the risk that you take when you do that.
Well, I think, going back to something you said earlier about identity, I think maybe it's some of that shifting, that if this is like the soul of your focus, then your identity gets real wrapped up in that, and if you do take a year off, then you find out you have other interests and things like that too, so, how does that cope with you getting back on this competitive cycle, so
it's tough. I mean, if you look at the reasons why lifters, let's just say serious lifters, lifters that have been in the sport for years and years and years, the reasons why they get out, typically, I mean, jail, I mean, you throw that in there, but, kids, marriage, I mean, they're big things that happen in their life that all of a sudden there's a big pivot, that causes that, so that identity changes, from that. But there's a lot of other ones that still have all those things happen in their life, but yet they still keep plugging away. Those are the ones that the only real way out is an injury they can't come back from.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real end of the road, for anybody that's a lifer, that's the reality. They may not want to admit it, but it's that, but I do think for the ones that are the more competitive, they're probably not going to end up being the masters lifter that's going out, lifting 60%, 50% of what they used to do in their prime.
Yeah, no, that's
I think it's like, what, I did my thing, I'm done.
That's something that Eddie talked about, that he didn't want to, lift as a master's lifter or anything like that. When it was done in the open, that was it. He didn't have any interest in doing that. Yeah,
I think I think pretty much every lifter, Jim Cash is like the only one that comes to my mind as one that still actively competes as a master, that competed very well as an open lifter. I think that's true with almost all open lifters, regardless of federation. It's just like, okay.
I've got a handful that, still are, I would say, as serious about it as masters as they were in the open or at any other point in their life. So I suppose that's just kind of the other side of it. as far as like when to maybe back off of the competitive powerlifting train a little bit.
It's a tough call. I mean, if you're my card was flipped for me. You know what I'm saying? So while the identity crisis was probably harder for me to deal with, I didn't have to make the decision.
Well, you know, I think that's an interesting part of this, right? That you do, like, you can't help for it to be part of who you are. I mean, it's a thing that you care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someday we're all going to hang it up. That's, you know, injury or not injury or whatever. Someday it's just going to happen. So what is that like? I mean, we know that it's coming. So I've always kind of been of the mindset, like, well, if I know that at some point I'm going to hang up my lifting belt, at least competitively, then I ought to be at least somewhat prepared for that. You know, it shouldn't come as a surprise, you know?
Yes.
So what do you do next? You know, so
I don't know. And I think that's one positive, I think, that comes out of the social media that gets overlooked. You can see what Eddie's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You can see what Steve Goggins is doing.
Yeah.
You can see what some of these other guys are doing. Then, you know, Steve's into bike ready now. So it's like, oh, okay. So, you know, there's other stuff, you know, where when it was just the magazines and that the magazines kind of controlled the narrative, you know, on what lifting was, you know, or who you thought Ed was, it was controlled by the magazines, you know, and now you can see, which I think makes the blow a little bit easier, because you can see, okay, they transitioned into this, and this, where, you know, if it was still just Powerlifting USA or Muscle and Fitness and Flex and so forth, they just disappear. Like, okay, I guess they died, you know, you know what I'm saying? Because you don't know, you know, or you see them later and they're small and you're like, what the fuck happened to him? You know, and you don't really know. Where now we can see Jay Cutler, Dorian Yates, we see all these other people, like, man, they're moving on. You know, downsizing is something that they commonly speak about. So I think the exit plan has actually become more clear for strength athletes because of social media, whereas before that wasn't clear at all. So it made it harder.
It's something that I'm a little bit out of touch with, maybe more than a little bit out of touch with, just because the people, I guess my peer group is all kind of in this stage, you know, so cultivating other interests or something like that, you know, at least at the mature points of their powerlifting careers, you know, whereas if I wonder what it's like, you know, if you're a young lifter and you're following these guys that are at the top of the sport now, like, do you have any interests in the old timers, I would say, you know,
I don't think so.
Them? No?
I mean, I think if we go back and look at ourselves, well, that's a bad example, because when I go back, I mean, I used to go through old Powerlifting USAs, and, you know, I know the history of the sport, you know, it's inside and out, and it wasn't because I lived through it. I mean, I know the history before me. So I don't know, you know, it's, you know, sometimes I wonder, you know, are there motives to win world championships, to break world records, or are there motives to lift big weights to be able to build a name on social media? You know, there's a couple lifters that have been brought to my attention, like, you know, if this guy really focused on just powerlifting, think of what he could do. And, you know, you're like, well, he could probably be, you know, do things that have never been done before, but put yourself in his position, you know, as 20-year-old kid, where's the greatest validation? You know, for us, the greatest validation was, let's make it to the nationals or worlds, and that Powerlifting USA top 100, and, you know, that was it, you know. But now the validation's changed. I don't know if it's good or bad, but, you know, well, I have my thoughts, you know, but they're biased, you know what I'm saying? So I got to understand my own bias, you know. I'd like to see these, because there's some people lifting freaky shit now, crazy shit, and I'm like, man, if you guys just fucking got rid of your social media, just focused on training and recovery, you destroy shit. And they're already doing it to begin with, but imagine, but on the, I talk in circles a lot. On the other end, are they doing it because all the validation they get through social media, through the training?
Maybe. I mean, it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing.
Like, it really is,
Yeah.
Now we're going to look at it differently because we're like, what the fuck? We didn't need this shit. It's, it would have been a distraction.
People used to say that about my training. I was training at some YMCA. I've got a video of me squatting out of this shaky ass squat rack and Sinead O'Connor on the stereo, and that's probably like one of my most viewed videos, and all the comments are about the music selection, and a friend of mine, this was 10 years ago now, a friend of mine at the time, somebody comes up to him and is like, man, can you imagine what Mike could do if he was at a real gym, like a powerlifting gym where they, played real music, is what he was getting
at. That's crazy,
And he's like, well, you ever think maybe he's doing well in competition, I mean, at the time, USA Powerlifting IPF meets had no music or anything like that, and, maybe it's not a big shock to him because he's used to this, So
that's kind of a running joke with me, because every now and again I'll film the max effort crap when I am in shape enough to lift anything that's worth a fuck. I'll film it to be able to put it on Instagram or wherever it is. Just I film it, then I troll myself, so I make it a joke thing. But I will purposely say, what was that song that the Spice Girls used to, I'll come up with the dumbest shit, like put on the Spice Girls, and because the real fact of the matter is, if you can hear any of the music from the time you turn it on to go to the bar to the time you rack it, then you haven't developed your mental capacity to the point it needs to be. Yeah. The song doesn't matter.
No,
and anything getting fired up before you begin to approach the bar is just a waste of energy. And to me, it cracks me up, because even when Joe Sullivan comes out here, it's like, Joe, put on Alicia Keys. And he's like, okay, and because of the stupid comments like that,
right?
Like, you guys, it's so, and you were a lifter that did better coaching yourself, so the videos and so forth serve the purpose of your analysis of your own training. You used a lot of metrics, bar speed, video, all these other kind of things, to be able to compensate for not having 3 or 4 eyes around you, like we had at Westside. And so that's intelligent training. And that's the thing people should be looking at, not Sinead O'Connor playing in the background.
Yeah, right, yeah. Oh, man, I don't know. I suppose as far as, like, what comes first, who knows? I mean, maybe those guys have some inclination one way or another. But it kind of, it goes to I think something else that maybe indicates my being a bit more out of touch than I'd like to be. People talking about other lifters, I suppose younger lifters, who do lift specifically so that they can put it on Instagram, let's say, or whatever social media. That just seems so weird to me. That like I can't imagine that that's a thing that people really do. I'm sure somebody always does something stupid, but is it really like this thing that's super common, this super epidemic? Like, I'm gonna do whatever stupid thing today that has absolutely no relevance to anything that it's not part of my training plan. It's just something, it's a stupid human trick that I can do to get some social media validation.
I think it is. I've unfollowed tremendous amounts of people, because sometimes you end up going down, I'm no different than anybody else, you end up going down this rabbit hole, and 2 hours later you realize you just wasted 2 hours of your life, over a period of a week. That's a lot of time. Sure. It's 10 hours. So I've kind of reduced, who I follow to pretty much just people that represent our company so I can see what they're doing, and that's about it, or go look and see. But before all that, I was following everybody that would follow me, follow back type crap, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You see all this insane stuff, and I even have people DM me now and they want, hey, can you look at my lift? And, I'll look at the lift, but it's still kind of a tough thing because you're asking me to look at one rep that could be one rep out of 50 in the whole day, for an analysis of one rep. It's I can help on that one rep, but what if the other 49 were all good? You just don't know. It's just, the video analysis is much further than your top set. This. It's how you train yourself. There's a lot that goes into that. You can, or what if you send me a video of that one rep and it was just really good, but all your warm up sucked.
So they're curating what they're sending to you, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I do think that a lot of people are going into the gym and with the intention of, well, what can I film today to be able to put up, to be able to get social validation. And if that's their goal, that's fine. Sure. But if their goal is to compete and to go push their ranking up in the USAPL or, make it to the Worlds or USPA or whatever federation they're in, they have to prioritize. And I think that goes back to what we were speaking about before is, when you're working with lifters, what is the overall objective here long term? Yeah. And then how do all these subcategories fit into that overall objective? And if it doesn't, it shouldn't be. I mean, everybody will come out and say, when programming, now, if you can't validate the reason why you're doing a movement, then don't do it. Mm-hmm. Well, let's take that more globally. If your training objective is to move up into the IPF or, just get to the Worlds, sure. How do you validate, these certain aspects of your life, going out and drinking or whatnot, to fit into that overall objective? Because if you're going to make exercise selections, critical exercise selections, that really are going to be irrelevant, curls or not curls, but not look at the fact that you're getting plastered every Friday night. Then you see what I'm saying? See how crazy it gets when you look at it globally? Yeah. And these are the type of conversations I have with a lot of lifters because they're so concerned in what periodization scheme they're doing or how to peak for a meet or how to do this. But then when you start speaking to them more globally on things like this, it's like, dude, you don't have to change your training program. You just need to fix all this other stupid shit.
Man, that's a tough ask too. And I'm sure you've run into that, dozens and dozens of times that, I was personally in this situation for the last, it's the end of October now, let's call it 6 months. We had a new baby in the spring, packed everybody up, moved to Holland. And like that whole process is just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And it came to this point where I was, always had something to do, either taking care of kids or getting settled or something during the day. So I was working at night, sleeping a couple hours, and I'm looking at my training program and kind of banging away on that. And it's like, dude, you're only sleeping 4 hours a night. Like, there's your problem, Mm-hmm. And okay, fix that. Damn it. I can't fix that.
But if you looked at it globally though, right?
Yeah.
Like you're thinking about competing next year.
Sure.
Would taking that whole entire month off training really matter for the meet in 2020?
Exactly. No.
And when you look at it globally, actually probably would have been the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Because then you would have allowed all the little injuries, all the little nagging things could have healed. You see what I'm saying? But
there's the problem
that's
with being self-coached, right?
Exactly. Well, it's the nature of that competitive mindset too.
Yeah.
Like, you know what, I can push through this.
Yeah.
But if you fall back on what that overreaching goal is, then you can better answer the questions. If it was 6 months before a meet, that makes a difference. You can't do that. But a year and a half or whatever it is out, what's the smart call here? You know, and you know what it is, but a lot of times I think it's taking that pause and then looking. I have to do this in business all the time, because in business you got to pivot a lot. I mean, I'm in retail. I got to pivot weekly. You know, you got to pivot based upon inventory, cash flow, you know, all these different things I got to pivot on and make these changes and all this other kind of stuff. But every now and again, you got to stop and pause and say, okay, how does this play into where we want to be 2 years from now? You know, you can't ignore what's in front of you, because it can put you out of business, right?
Yeah.
Or in training, it can be the next injury. You still have to take care of the things that you have to take care of to be able to keep healthy and keep the business moving forward. But if you get too tied up in all the minuscule and all that day-to-day and forget about what that overall objective is, you're never going to get it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I write about the things that I've learned in gym and how I've been able to apply it to training, this is the perfect examples, you know, of those type of things.
There's a lot of this interplay, you know, and I know you've realized it because you've written about it, but there's a lot of this interplay between training and business, and I guess some other, obviously other aspects of life, but that's what's really coming to mind right now, is that if training is this process of, you know, formulating a plan, you know, short, medium, long term, tinkering the plan to new information as you get it, and adapting as you go. Business is very similar to that.
It is. The only dynamic that I've found that doesn't transfer from training, competitive powerlifting to business is the selfishness and ego that I think is necessary to be your best in the sport. You cannot have that in business. You just can't. And you can't, because your team's going to despise you. Your employees are going to hate you. You know, they do all the work, right? You know, so you can't take all the credit for their work. Right. They do all the work. You don't. None of the credit's yours. It's theirs. But if they fuck up, the responsibility is all yours, not theirs. That's just the nature. But that's completely inverse when you're a competitive athlete. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you still have a lot of responsibility, but you have to have that ego, and you have to have that supreme confidence that you can take out anything and fuck anything that gets in your way. But it doesn't work. But outside of that, everything else is so transferable into life, relationships, business, all of that, you know, I look at friends of mine that have been in the sport for a long period of time, and I look at, you know, what they're doing just with their life, and it's like, dude, how can you have had an all-time world record and you can't pull this shit together? Like, I don't get this, you know. It's the same thing, you know, being committed to a goal, showing up, you know. But it's like they can't figure it out, you know.
Well, so your business is celebrating 20 years of being in business this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about it from like a relationship standpoint, relationships always change as they age. How is your relationship with, I guess the relationship with the company sounds kind of a weird way to put it, but it's something like that. How's your experience, I guess, being the CEO changed over those years? How has that shifted?
Kind of the same cycle that, you know, everything is. You know, you start out, you know, bootstrapping everything, you know, because it takes forever to be able to make any money whatsoever. Then you start to make a little bit of money, and then you take it for granted, and then it basically gets taken away, you know, through, you know, shit always happens in business. You know, there's cash flow issues or whatever it is, then you get grounded again, and then you kind of come full circle with it, where, you know, my intention and probably my skill set as well is not designed to be able to, you know, scale at a very dynamic pace. You know, I just wanted to have something that I just didn't have to work doing anything else again. Had I gone into it thinking I want to create something that I can blow up in 3 or 4 years, sell, and then use that, to live off of the rest of my life, the whole scheme of everything would have been different, but it wouldn't have fit my overriding values of helping other people.
Yeah.
So the longer we can stay alive as a business, the more people I can be able to help, and give them, what was given to me, which seems to be a dying concept in today's world. And, so that's the driving force of keeping the business plugging away. So it's, in a way, it's a little limiting, because my driving force isn't let's tenfold the business over the next 3 years. My driving force is we just need to keep plugging away so we can keep helping people and teaching them that, strength training and strength sports can have a profound effect, on their life, and not nickel and dime them to be able to teach them, these lessons that can really help. This live, learn, pass on thing. It's like in my DNA from junior high, a coach taking the time to change my life, so, that's the driving force with that. But I mean, personally, I've had to change as far as, education, because markets change. And, when we came online, there really wasn't anybody else online. There's T-Nation and a couple other places, and then forums which were more just, joking around, I think, trolls. Some people would get pissed, but there wasn't social media. GoHeavy.com was our social media. It's
right. Yeah.
Then half the people after a while are like, fuck, this is not worth my time. It's too stressful. These guys are idiots. And then you kind of pull off of that, but there really wasn't a whole lot there. So we were doing things like the Q&A and stuff like that, which today are more or less Facebook groups and those type of things. So technology-wise, to try to stay in front has been hard, to where I think technology-wise, we fall behind. Then we got to catch up again, and we fall behind because technology moves so fast, and we're not a tech company. We're a company trying to help people get stronger. So, and we're still, to me, articles are still key. It's people need to read to absorb, and, everything else is moving videos. So we do videos, but that's, it could be me being old. I hate that, because you can learn from that, but, to really learn, I fall back on what I know. You got to read, you study, you need to apply, you need to do that. So it's a combination of all that. So that's where I got to rely on the people that we hire to be smarter than I am, to be able to navigate that stuff. Because if not, I would just still be putting out, training logs and articles and doing nothing else.
Man, I can relate to a lot of that, and definitely it's a different space, but as far as not being interested in trying to grow the biggest thing possible, as far as, would like things to grow, but we'll keep chipping away at it. We'll get there in due time, as far as being involved in tech, but not really being a tech company, man, geez, you're totally right about other people who are, or other companies who are tech companies, have a big advantage there, but it's also a different mindset that they're bringing to it. It's a different offering, really.
Well,
and it goes back to what you said in the beginning. Sorry, it goes back to what you said in the beginning about understanding the business that you're in.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
That this thing that you're doing, that I'm doing is like, for me, we've built this training log thing on our website, and there are other companies who are doing similar things, but it's not really, like, only if you look at a surface level. It's like, well, this guy wrote a book and you wrote a book. Well, the books are about different things, really,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, I can say, we have, a huge competitor, probably the biggest competitor that's ever been in the space ever, and I can sit there and say the business they're in is manufacturing and creating jobs. And I don't think they would disagree with that in any way whatsoever. 600 employees, and that's the business they're in. That's not the business I'm in. We're in two different businesses now. We serve, and we end up serving kind of the same market, but two different businesses. Because you can get wrapped up into, I need to compete with what they're doing, but they're not in that business. They're not in our business. So I start competing with manufacturing and creating jobs, right? That's not what I do. That's not what I'm passionate about. I'm going to suck at it, so I'm going to get destroyed. Where if I focus on what we do best, then the longevity is going to be there, and until somebody else, focuses on what you do best and they do better than you. But that's competition. You want that because then that forces you to have to step back and say, okay, look, we need to reevaluate our shit. Is it 10 years old? Is it 5 years old? What do we need to do to keep plugging forward, to keep doing that?
So you could look at, I guess, what you do that's unique to help gain some insight on what that is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so some of the things that, from just say the equipment standpoint, quality is definitely unique. We can speak about that left and right, but quality ultimately is going to be determined by the customer because, it's a matter of educating them on what the highest quality is. But branding, so the custom branding that we can do for somebody is top notch. There's few competitors when it comes to that. So in today's world where every CrossFit basically looks the same. You walk into one, they all look the same. They're all branded the same. Maybe the name on the wall is different, but everything looks the same. At some point in time, people have to distinguish themselves from the pack. Now you walk in and, all the equipment in there is branded with their logo, either laser cut, vinyl, or whatever it's going to be. Now it looks like a university weight room.
Yeah.
Boom. You walk in there, university weight rooms are set up to train the athletes, but they're also set up for recruiting. So while we do hit the university market, we also hit that private gym market, which is set up for training athletes, but they're also set up for recruiting, which is basically sales, to be able to bring them in. So that would be the uniqueness from that aspect. From the retail aspect, shirts, wraps, straps, all that other kind of crap. That's just providing the best customer service that we can provide, so people are going to want to do business with us compared to a competitor because we care more.
Unfortunately, that's where my recording ended. Sorry. I can't say anything other than just sorry. Things were rolling along, having a good conversation, and then technical difficulties popped up to sabotage things. But one thing I do think is important, just as my conversation with Dave wrapped up, obviously you can reach out to him in a variety of different ways. There's EliteFTS.com. On Instagram, he's at Under the Bar. And Dave makes it a point to personally answer all of his DMs. So if you've got a question, you want to get some advice or anything like that, just send him a DM. He really encourages that, and he means it. So I think that's just really cool. So those were kind of some of the closing thoughts that he wanted to leave you guys with, and I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I know that I did. It was really cool getting to talk to Dave again after so many years, and hopefully we do it again sooner than that. Hopefully it's not nearly as long before our next conversation. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Reactive Training Systems.